Hello and welcome to this episode of the Driven Podcasts. My name is Sam Parkinson, and today I'm joined by the Driven contributor Tim Eden. Tim, how's it going?
Really well, thanks, Sam. Yeah, how about yourself?
I'm doing good, thank you. And we're also joined by Carloop founder and Driven contributor Riz Akhtar, who is recently back from his latest overseas trip and possibly brought something back along with him in the form of, well, what is it? Riz, how are you feeling? You're not feeling
Hey,
top notch.
not feeling the best, but I think I took it there
Oh, you
on
took
the plane. I took it there without knowing I was taking it there. I think I caught it on the plane because the person in front of me was coughing a bit. Um, and then yeah, I was there and it got a little bit worse. And then yeah, just got back today and starting to recover, which is cool. But it's still such a fascinating place. Every couple of weeks you go and there's all these new EV models.
Now we're talking about China, aren't we? Because I didn't think I specified where you went, but yes, you saw. So you went again, and there were new again more EV models. So were you there for the Shanghai Motor Show? Was it a couple? How many months ago was that? Was that a
Yeah, April, May,
few months ago? Yeah. And so you went back last week, and even since then you've seen some new stuff.
and in between that, I was there again in May. So between May and now, there were more models. Some pretty big launches as well that have happened in the last week or so, which is yeah, that market's moving far too quickly.
Yeah, too quickly. Um, yeah, well, I think we've gotten some feedback from some listeners, I would say, who might say that or might suggest that we are some maybe a little bit too pro China in the EV space, but just to reassure everyone, if it just happens to be where a lot of the developments are happening. It's not because of the particular location. It's just where things are happening. If the EV market was happening in Jindabyne, we would be talking about Jindabyne a lot of the time. But it's just happening in China, which is where a lot of the models are coming out and where a lot of the dev is happening. So that's why we talk about it. Um, sounds like that's still the case. They're still going along and popping out new models here and there. And and yeah, we might get you to might do another episode where we go maybe a bit more into depth as to what kind of models we might be able to expect on Australian shores in the coming months and year. But in the meantime, let's just catch up, I guess, with some of the news of the week. Riz, we've talked about this budget version of the Tesla Model Y. It's kind of been talked about a bit. Still haven't seen it, but we've caught a glimpse of it. Is that right? We might have seen a glimpse of what it might look like. No panoramic roof. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so the first, I mean, it's sort of been speculated for the last 12 to 18 months. Tesla themselves put it in their earnings call deck a couple of times saying we're still working towards um, production by June 2025. Apparently, that production has started, but it won't be going into any volume production till Q4, which is what we learned at their earnings call recently. So there's a little bit of a delay in that car going into volume production. But we have seen a bit of a sneak peek as to what that more affordable model could look like. It's missing, well, in the latest prototype that we've seen, it's missing um, the moonroof or the glass roof that most Teslas have, the Model 3s and the Model Ys. Um, it's also uh, appears to have no rear screen. Like the new Model Ys have a rear screen for the rear passengers. Um, there's a bit more of, I guess, a reduction in the length of the car. So still looks like a Model Y, but slightly shorter. It's also expected to have smaller wheels, so possibly 18-inch wheels instead of the 19s and 20s that we find on the Model Ys. And then no ventilated seats. probably will go to cloth seats.
What about the battery? Is that changing? Do we know anything about that?
Not much is known, but I suspect it will probably be a slightly smaller battery pack as well. So yeah, we'll find out what the range and all other details are. But at this stage, visually, from what we can see, it's a little bit more of a bare bone version of what you get in the new Model Y today.
What I mean, how popular do you think this is going to be, and what kind of price does it need to be for it to be a popular option?
Um, Look, I think, to be honest, I don't even think this car is for the Australian market. Like, as in, they'll launch it here eventually, but I suspect the bigger market it has is actually in China, which is the fastest growing new energy electric vehicle market, where there is quite, people that want to get something that is a little bit more on the affordable end. Um, like, you can see some of the vehicles that BYD and other brands are selling in China, and they are considerably cheaper than the Model Y today. Um, so if Tesla wants to be in the more mainstream end of town, they will need to have that price shaved, you know, quite a bit, because it allows more people to have access to that type of vehicle where they no longer have to save, 55, 60 grand. They can, hopefully be able to get it in sort of mid to late 40s. So yeah, that's what it sort of is supposed to do anyway.
I mean, we don't have obviously the volume of demand in Australia compared to China, but I mean, there is a demand for more affordable EVs in Australia, surely. I don't know, Tim. What do you think? Do you think that's I mean, to me, it sounds like something which would be potentially quite interesting for the Australian market. But what are your thoughts on this? I mean, you own a Model 3. I guess I'm asking you two questions. One, from the perspective of an existing Tesla owner, how does this idea of an affordable version with some cutbacks on the specs sound to you? Is it appealing or not? And how do you think it sounds to someone who hasn't owned a Tesla or an EV yet?
Yeah, both good questions, Sam. I think from my perspective, I think I agree with a lot of the stuff Riz was saying about it gives access to a broader market share or broader market, because you got people who potentially want a Tesla but maybe just can't quite stretch to the price range. So it should help those people, I guess. As for whether it's a good option versus some of the other cheaper cars, like for example, I just finished testing the Geely EX5, which we might talk about later, but that car has a lot of great features, and it's about 40 to 45,000 in Australia, so quite a bit under the Model Y.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think both. I mean, we can. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's always going to be interesting news when Tesla are talking about a different model, a new subsidized model, I suppose, if you want, of their Model Y. But I think as long as you remember that there are also other models already here, like the EX5, as you said, that are around that price point that a reduced Model Y would probably come in at. So you had that EX5 for you test drove it recently, is that right?
Yeah, I had that for a week and just returned it on Monday this week, and yeah, look, overall, I thought it was a great car. I think there's been quite a lot of coverage of that already. It's been out for a few months now, but in my experience, I really enjoyed driving it. It's like any car, it's not perfect. It's got a few faults. The biggest fault I had with it was with the driver monitoring system. So when I'm driving, typically out in the day, I've got my regular pair of sunglasses that I use, and they're a little bit reflective, and the car, for whatever reason, just couldn't see my eyes. So it was just basically beeping constantly, telling me that the driver distraction detected, and I'm like, man, I'm not distracted, Julie, come on. So that got a bit frustrating. I eventually worked out that it was the sunnies causing the issue, so I could either take them off, or I dug out an old pair of sunnies and put those on to mostly resolve it. But it was still an issue, and I noticed Riz put this in his review of it too. My review should be up soon, but basically, I was just got to an intersection, like with a give way, and I'm looking both ways, and it goes off then as well. So it's not just an issue with eye detection with glasses on. So definitely needs some work in that area. But I think apart from that, I really enjoyed it. As I said earlier, it's got some great all kinds of features For less than $50,000, you get a car with heated steering wheel, heated, ventilated, massaging front seats, big sunroof that opens up as well. Plenty of space, medium SUV. So yeah, quite a compelling option, I would say. And the sales are showing that as well. It was fourth spot in EV sales in June, and it's already seventh year to date on the charts. And it was only went on sale in March this year. So it's doing.
Yeah, I've started seeing a few of them around actually, and I did drive it myself for a day or two, uh, and I agree with most of what you said. I thought it was actually quite a good vehicle, and it's a whole lot of car for the price. Riz, do you have similar thoughts on the EX5?
Yeah, look, having driven it, sort of having seen the evolution of that car from driving it back in November last year in China, which was, it was geared a lot towards sort of the family comfort end of town. They've made quite a few changes to it locally to make it a bit more, feel a little bit more responsive on the road, on Australian roads. Um, Overall, like both of you, as both of you said, right, it's great value. Very few cars can sort of come close to it on that front. I think what they've done as a whole package is great. If they could just fix those little tiny things that, it makes driving that car, like overall, it's such an enjoyable thing to drive for its price point. But just basic things like that driver monitoring system, um, even doing head checks, and I think Tim mentioned earlier, just, even a set of traffic lights, it just goes off. I think they fixed that ice cream sound, the, that they had at low speeds. Um, the slightly annoying part about the way that car manages its notifications is like it lowers the volume of whatever you're listening to, and that can get annoying when, especially when it like misjudges speed changes on the road. Um, and yeah, but all in all, these things can be fixed with software. And I've seen, hundreds of very, very happy owners on Facebook groups and forums and other places as well. So good job, Geely. But yeah, just listen to a little bit more of what the customers and, reviewers and others are saying about how that car can be improved, and it will do them a whole lot of good.
I mean that this monitoring system that we're talking about with the eye monitoring and making sure that you're paying attention. I mean, this is not unique to the EX5. Is it? My understanding is that that's got to do with the requirements now for getting the top marks with ANCAP. So having all these safety features, which some people are finding quite frustrating. And I've had this experience not with the EX5, but I had it when I was driving the EV9, just kind of telling me that I'm not looking in the right direction, even if I'm just looking at the maps on the dash. Like I'm, just kind of this over policing of the driver. So this is something which kind of is happening in multiple vehicles, from what I understand. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I was going to say that's definitely accurate, Sam. I think that's I've heard from other journalists and stuff that the car maker and from the car makers themselves that this is some of those safety features are a requirement, and that's why things like the speed limit warning and some of the other systems automatically turn back on every time you drive, because it has to kind of be on by default, if that makes sense. Some of the manufacturers like Kia and Hyundai have done some work through the software to make, if those systems are annoying, and they mentioned that during launch events and stuff. Oh, we know this can be annoying, so we've created this shortcut. So there's like a shortcut button you can configure to go straight to the driver assistance systems and disable some of those if you want to. So that's something I think Geely could work on, because it took about 5 or 6 different presses and scrolling through the settings to actually find the speed limit warning and turn it off. As Riz was saying, you can turn that one off, fortunately, but you can't turn off the driver monitoring thing in the Geely. And the other thing I was going to say is they're not. There's a lot of cars that have these systems now, but they're not all annoying, because I noticed when I had the Polestar 4 a few months ago, I was driving that, and it actually impressed me because I had the exact same sunnies on. It wasn't really giving me any false positives, and I was testing it out on the highway. I was looking dead ahead, straight on through the windscreen, and I would just move my eyes to the left and look at, say, the screen or out the left window. It would still take the exact same amount of time as if I'd moved my head, like 3, 4, 5 seconds, whatever it is, and it would beep and say distraction detected. So somehow the same system in the Polestar could actually just detect my eyes moving through the sunglasses and work without issues, whereas the Geely one also had big problems with glasses. So
Okay, yeah. So in other words, I mean, it's also just about the way in which the particular car that you're driving is enforcing or delivering on those requirements for that ANCAP rating.
yeah, for sure.
Not just
And I think there's definitely Polestar is another brand in the Geely group, so they could potentially talk to each other, and maybe it's a software fix, maybe it's a hardware fix, but I'm sure they can fix it.
Okay. Moving on to another Chinese brand, Xpeng. Riz, you wrote about their plans to bring was it 1,000 of its G6 SUVs per month to Australian customers. Is this going to be something that you see doing well in Australia?
Yeah, Sam, I think it was a press release that came from the distributor this week to say that they have the next 1,000 cars arrive on a ship for August and September deliveries, and that moving forward, they are planning on bringing 1,000 cars a month to quote unquote meet rising demand, which could be the case. And we officially don't know how many cars they have actually sold or delivered in Australia through FCAI's, VFACTS, or the Electric Vehicle Council's reporting. But according to the press release, they reckon thousands of Xpeng G6s are on Australian roads now. So yeah, I guess if it's to instill confidence amongst buyers that, hey, there's a lot of these G6s are being purchased, and that it's a safe product for people to purchase, then that press release might do the job. But I guess we will find out once they've started to supply some proper credible numbers as to how many they're selling, and then we can sort of gauge for ourselves if there's enough demand for that car to warrant 1,000 odd cars a month coming on ships.
Right. Okay. So hang on. So we they don't release how many they. Is that because when we ask them what their numbers are for sales, they say they don't have them, or we have them but you can't have them? What's the response we're getting from them? I mean,
Yeah, I can jump in there, Sam. So I've asked Xpeng a number of times, as part of trying to record the sales figures as we do each month. And I saw that same press release Riz was mentioning. So, I responded to that a couple of days ago saying, oh, hey, I've asked this before, but I'll try again, just try my luck kind of thing. And I got a response, which I can just quote. It's only a short one. Basically, it just says, at this stage, True EV, which is the importer, is not releasing monthly sales figures. They're still evaluating the most appropriate approach to local reporting that aligns with their long-term strategy and operational structure. We appreciate your continued interest in tracking Xpeng's progress in Australia, and we'll let you know if and when that position changes. So, yeah, they basically said that they're not ready to report their sales figures. So.
They're trying to figure out how to release the numbers that lines up with their long-term strategic planning. Are we talking about are they thinking about whether they're using Google Sheets or like a PDF, or like what's the it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I think this is something which Sarah Aubrey, who was on the last episode, she touched on the bit of a frustration of some brands not being very forthcoming or forthcoming at all in this case with their EV numbers, because one, it's obviously interesting to know, but it also has an impact on our understanding as to how EVs are going in terms of uptake. So if we don't have those figures, then it's kind of hard to get an overall accurate picture of what is the uptake of EVs. So yeah, I mean, hopefully that becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel. I guess perhaps once Xpeng itself, the OEM takes over operations, maybe they'll change their tune. But yeah,
okay, interesting stuff. Okay, Riz, we're seeing a new electric model from Nissan in the form of this the Aria. vehicle, and they announced some pricing and specs. What can you tell us on that one?
Yeah, so the second Nissan electric model after the old school Leaf that had been around for a while, that's recently gone through a bit of a refresh, a new model that will be coming out maybe next year for the Australian market. But Aria has been around in other markets for a couple of years now. It's sort of a mid-sized electric SUV that is finally coming to Australia now. Um, it's priced in the 50,000s when it comes to an entry level. And I think the top spec sort of gets above 70,000. And for that, you get I think it looks like a relatively stylish sort of a family SUV, but it might be coming in a little bit too late into the market, given we've already spoken about some of the cars on this podcast, like the Geely EX5 and the Xpeng G6 and even the Model Y. So I guess time will tell, but that car, the Nissan Ariya, is expected to arrive um, into Australia by Q4, the latest. So yeah, we'll see it before the end of the year.
It kind of looks a little bit like a Listing Leaf, doesn't it? I mean, it's kind of like a slightly bigger version of the Leaf from the images that I saw. To me, it reminded me a lot of the Leaf, and of course, Nissan haven't had a huge range of EVs available in Australia since the Leaf. In fact, have they what else have they brought out apart from the Leaf in terms of
Just the Leaf.
just the Leaf? Well, that that's why I think there hasn't been many, because there haven't been any. So yeah,
At least Aria comes with a CCS2 charge port. That's a positive.
right. Okay, sure.
No one using CHAdeMO like the Leaf. So
Oh, of course, yes, because I think it's getting harder and harder to find the CHAdeMO chargers.
it would be.
I'm seeing them less and less, and I guess for good reasons. What are there many other vehicles that use CHAdeMO? Like,
Of the battery electric vehicles, it was only the Leaf. And some of the older BMW i3s.
okay, yeah,
that was well, I think.
geez, yeah,
And some of the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV have a CHAdeMO port as well.
okay, right. Oh, well, that'd be interesting to see how that goes. Hopefully, we can get our hands on a test drive in the near future, and yeah, see how that plays in, as you said, Riz, an increasingly competitive market, particularly in that mid-size SUV range. Good stuff. Okay, maybe just quickly, just want to touch on the Zeekr X, which Tim, you took out on a loan for what was it, a week or two? I think you had it. What's your take on that particular vehicle, the Zeekr X?
Sure. Yeah, I had this one a few weeks ago. Managed to take it on a nice road trip to visit my brother, who's up in sort of the northern part of New South Wales. And yeah, I think overall that was a really nice car to drive as well. So different to the Geely. The Zeekr is also owned by Geely, the brand, but this one is much more sporty, fun to drive, much quicker. Like I have the dual motor version, which goes 0 to 100 in less than 4 seconds. So quite quick, and really nice to drive around the bends. Took out to my brother's place up Waterfall Way past Dorrigo and those kind of places, if anyone knows it. And there's some really nice roads up there. So had a lot of fun driving that car. Like any car, though, it's got its faults, and I think that one had probably a worse fault than the EX5. The Zeekr X had a particularly sensitive auto braking system. So if you were trying to, it went off probably a dozen times, and the week I had it. And for anyone who's been in a car that's got that auto braking feature and it goes off unexpectedly, it sort of pumps you full of adrenaline, and you're like, what just happened, and kind of leaves your heart rate beating fast for a while afterwards. So this one on the Zeekr, it would just happen. It happened a few times, just doing a 3-point turn, or just I'm doing a parallel park, and there's a tree or another car that's it's not particularly close, but the car for some reason just detects it and jams on the brakes, and so that was not the best experience. But that one you could turn off. But similar to what we've been talking about, it turns back on every time you drive, which is kind of annoying. But at least there is a setting to turn that one off on the Zika.
Okay. And what's the pricing on that one again for the?
That one. So there's two variants in that one. There's the rear wheel drive and the all wheel drive. The rear wheel drive, for memory, is just under 50 plus on road costs, and the all wheel drive is about 62. I think it was 62, 63 plus on roads. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So the rear wheel drive one's sort of competitive with some of those ones around the 50K price range. But yeah,
Have you driven that one, Riz, the X?
Yeah, it's but I drove it before it had the price cuts, and with the price cuts, it's quite a good car. I mean, there's not many other cars you can get with like nearly 200 kilowatts at the rear, sort of with the rear motor at that price point. And it's got, it's pretty comfortable, quite a lot of tech in it. Yes, there's some things that, can be improved, but all in all, I think this is the price that, at this price point, I see a lot more buyers now quite interested in the Zeekr X. So just ahead of, Zeekr's other cars that are potentially going to be coming into the market, such as the 7X, which is, expected in the coming months.
Yeah, well, actually, I think we're gonna go along and see the 7X launch next week. So we'll report on initial impressions on that one at least. So that's going to be a little bit more of a slightly bigger, more luxury version of the X. Would that be a fair assessment on what that looks like? Is that what it's supposed to be?
It's supposed to be more premium, so it's bigger than a Tesla Model Y in terms of its length. But yeah, it's very, very plushy, like borderline luxury sort of product. So yeah, look forward to hearing what Sam and Tim, you both think about the car after you've had a initial look at it.
Yeah, cool. No, we'll be reporting back on that one. All right, cool. I did an interview with Dave Budge, who is the co-founder and CEO of Jaunt Motors, who've been doing some electric conversions, and so we're going to go and listen to that interview that I did with him just a short time ago, and when we get back, we'll talk about it a bit more and some other news of the week. But we'll be back in just a minute. Dave Budge, welcome to the Driven podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So you are the CEO and co-founder of Jaunt Motors. I might get you actually just to start off by telling us, for those who are not familiar, what it is that Jaunt Motors does.
Yeah, sure. We take classic cars, iconic cars, and make them electric. So, for example, that might be Land Rovers, Combis, Minis, Mokes, Porsche 911, and take the internal combustion petrol diesel motor out and replace that with an electric motor and batteries. And in the process, upgrade the 12-volt electrics, often do things like add air conditioning and heating to cars that didn't usually have it. Basically trying to make these old classic shapes that are beautiful stylistically perform like a modern car so that you can drive them every day.
And so you convert classic cars. Is it any classic car, or are there specific models that you can do?
Yeah, technically we can convert anything, and we get a lot of inquiries is it possible to do X? And the answer is, yeah, it's kind of possible to convert any car. The challenge would be the individual expense of doing a one-off. So we made a decision very early on to focus on particular models of vehicle, and rather than so that we could do them well, so that we could not just improve and put an electric motor and batteries in and therefore make, I guess, one pedal, the accelerator pedal, work better, but make sure that we improve the steering and the braking and the handling and all those other things that brought the whole car up to a level and just made it a better vehicle. And to do that, you need to look into the thousands of parts that go into each vehicle and really understand it. So it was a decision to either build one-off, very, very, very expensive things and do all the development for one vehicle, or do the R&D on a platform and then be able to do that at scale. And at scale for us, of course, we're not talking thousands of vehicles, we're talking tens of vehicles, but it still allowed us to, I think, build something that was reliable, that we could reuse components, that we could offer the things that you would kind of want, the good documentation, good levels of support, software updates. Those are things that are very difficult to do if every car was unique.
So you can do bespoke ones, but
yeah, and we do, but very rarely. Yeah.
Yes, and obviously at greater expense.
Yes.
Naturally. And so when you say platform specific, is every model have its own? So they have their own platform specific. Is a platform specific per model, or are there platforms that can be used across various models?
Yeah, so I think we would always like to think, how can we use this charger or this battery pack or whatever it might be in as many cars as possible, that we love working with this, we know how to program it, whatever it might be. So there is a lot of commonality of parts across all the cars that we work on. But the challenge is that we're dealing with cars that were never designed with being an EV in mind, designed by different manufacturers in different decades. So the packaging of those, like literally how and where they fit, that always has to be different. So that means different mounting brackets. If it's a heavy component like a battery pack, we've got to do all the crash simulation and testing on the strength of those mounts. That means redesigning the wiring harness to suit those new locations. So even in something like an extreme end, we've got a series Land Rover system that so that's 60s, 70s Land Rovers, which we've been building for quite a few years. The battery pack, the charger, a whole bunch of components in that is exactly the same as what we're putting in a one-off build at the moment, which is a 1958 Corvette. Now that's a totally different car from a different continent and a different decade. But we are using the same parts. It's just been a considerable effort to redesign where they fit in the car and how they mount and how that's strong enough. And then sometimes that means in the Corvette's case, it was like, well, we can use this same battery pack, but we're going to need to rethink the way the steering works. Now, you wanted to do that anyway because the steering was a bit terrible in a 58 Corvette. So there's these flow-on effects and engineering challenges that go beyond the electrical engineering, and we find that on each vehicle it's not as much electrical engineering as it perhaps is mechanical engineering to bring all the other components up to standard. And by standard I mean in some cases our standard in terms of is it good enough, but but also overlaid with is it good enough, does it meet Australian standards for putting more performance in an old car and passing brake tests and crash tests and all those things.
Right. Okay. So there is some overlap between different models, platforms, but ultimately each model is really going to have its own unique kind of attributes or requirements because they're so different.
And the big thing is with that is making sure that those decisions that we're making, and this gets very subjective, but the feel of the car is retained. And of course, that's where we'll get argument of like, well, you rip the motor out, the feel of the car is gone. I think being a fan of these cars that we're working with before we made them electric, and now having driven enough of them being electric and giving people drives, whether that's the president of the Mini Club or the Volkswagen specialist around the corner, that what you quickly realize is that it's not, this is maybe is a bit extreme, but it's like, it wasn't the petrol motor that made these cars great. In many cases, they were great in spite of the motor that they had. Now, that people can get a little bit angry at that statement, but I would argue that my first car was a combi van, and I loved it, right? But it wasn't that, so that the sound of the combi's motor, that dung 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 dung, you've got memories associated with the fun times you had in that combi, and the sound of that motor was there with you. But it would be nicer if you could go uphill faster than 40 km an hour or whatever. So it was a wonderful car. It had a motor that worked and had some character, but it was along for the ride, so to speak. And by putting in an electric motor and increasing that performance, it's our job not to dramatically change the handling. We're not taking a new vehicle platform and putting an old body on, which would then drive like a very, very different car. We're trying to keep that feel, just make it what it always could have been.
Okay, yes. I think before I was aware of electric conversions, an assumption I might have made was that doing an electric conversion for a classic car would require you just be looking at taking out the motor and then you're putting in a battery, and it's kind of going to be like, a electric lawnmower, where you just kind of put something in and it's going to be electric, and that's cool, but it's not going to retain a lot of the characteristics that you're talking about that vehicle. So you guys are doing it in a way where you're trying to retain those essential characteristics that make the car what it is, which is obviously important because that's why people are investing in doing it with their classic cars, right? So there's a lot. It's not just about putting the battery in.
Yeah, I think there's in some cases, this is us trying really hard and doing a lot of work, and in other cases, it's just it's by not doing the work that keeps the charm and the character of the car. So what you realize quickly is it's the way the suspension was set up. The design of the architecture of the car, the way the steering worked, just the seating position and all those things were such a big part of the feel of the car. And so you're not trying to fundamentally change them. So a decision that might be an example was this 1958 Corvette we're working on. It was the last of the solid rear axle Corvettes. After that, they went independent suspension. One thing that people have done with these early Corvettes to do EV conversions overseas is take a whole Tesla rear end, so Tesla's whole rear suspension architecture, and bolt or weld that on, which gives you modern, say, Tesla Model 3 independent suspension. Now, that is objectively a much better suspension system than an old solid axle, but it changes that car dramatically. It changes the feel of that car. Now, maybe for the better in terms of sort of quantifiable metrics in performance and handling, but maybe not sort of, quality is the wrong word, but it changes the feel. So in that case, it was about going, we could put this whole rear assembly in, or we could put an electric motor where the transmission was and drive a new prop shaft into the old axle, which makes it still drive and feel like a solid axle 1958 Corvette, just with a better powertrain.
Is that complicated, trying to identify what characteristics of a vehicle you want to improve because you can, and also what characteristics you want to retain, just because that's an essential part of the personality of the vehicle?
Yes. I guess it's an interesting one because is it complicated? Maybe not. It's because it's kind of so much gut feel. So an example might be for the Mini. The Mini's quintessential thing was great handling. Lightweight car, great weight balance, great handling. So your whole point and mission when doing a Mini is don't compromise that handling. So everything else is, it's not like we've got the budget to redesign every single component of the car, and we're working with good off-the-shelf components, and these are cars that are iconic for a reason, and they've got great aftermarket support. But you're looking at the Mini. One comment, I guess, that would come up in social media posts is, someone sees a video of a Mini or something, and they're like, oh, you've taken a great car and made it 2 tons. You've made this perfect handling car. It's super heavy now. And it's like, well, no, not all EVs have to be heavy. There's a reason many modern ones are, because there's luxury and sound deadening and all these other things that keep adding to weight. But we have made this Mini is now 20 kilograms lighter than when it was petrol. The point was to keep that handling. The compromise that you make is, well, it's going to have a small battery pack. But what's a Mini that weighs too much? It's not a Mini anymore. What's the point? So let's make these core decisions. And I think it's not necessarily, it's not like we're the smartest people in the automotive world. We're dealing with cars who have had, columns and videos upon videos made about what makes them great. There is things. A Land Rover is solid axle, 4-wheel drive, short wheelbase. That's what makes it great off road. And the seating position. The Mini's about the handling. Like these are the known things that are kind of the key points that made these cars what they are.
Okay, and so is there, to an extent, it's your gut feeling that you're going with, rather than, can a customer say they bring in their Mini, do they fill out a form which gives them a say as to what is that you're changing, or like how customized is that?
To an extent, but maybe the easier answer is no, they don't. They're buying a Jaunt system. So
Yes.
you come in, and we are not a classic car workshop where some of those places you can imagine it's the customer comes in, they're specifying each nut and bolt. You're coming in and you're buying a Jaunt vehicle, a Jaunt Land Rover, Jaunt Mini, and you can choose the color of the outside and the inside. Now there's a little bit more variation to that. In some models, you can choose to have power steering or not. Others, like a Land Rover, power steering is default, and that is because we need to upgrade the steering to add a collapsible section for safety. So that just comes with the power steering. Some other vehicles, like a Moke, for example, you can choose to have a handbrake, like a manual handbrake, or an electric park brake. So there is a few little options, and you can choose a stereo and that sort of thing. But fundamentally, no, you get the Jaunt architecture, and do you want the big or the small battery pack?
Sure. Okay, makes sense. You mentioned Moke there. Now you guys recently launched an electric conversion platform specifically for the Mini Moke. So why the Mini Moke? What's inspired you to do this, customize a platform for this particular for vehicle?
So ever since we launched the Mini project, the Mini conversion, was it 2 years ago now? We got inquiries about Moke. So Moke, if you're not familiar, just the most minimal car there can be, a little platform, no doors, no roof, or canvas roof, sort of a windscreen and a few seats. And
Like a bathtub on wheels.
yeah, right. And but it was based fundamentally on the Mini. So the same engine, same subframe, same steering system, all the Mini drivetrain was bolted into the Moke to make it go. And it was sort of an attempt. The story is that it was an attempt to make a vehicle to sell to the military back in the 60s, 50s, 60s. And but then it became this beach icon as well. So ever since we made Mini, people asked about, do you do Mokes? And eventually we had enough people asking about that to say yes, and it's, we'll do a couple, and we'll do the development, because there is a bit of repackaging of battery packs and wiring and all these kinds of things. So it was a thing we wanted to do, and it was a natural extension of that platform. And it is the Moke to an Australian audience is maybe you don't know the name, but you've probably seen it, or you haven't seen one, but you know the name, because it was such a big thing because we built them here. But they're quite a rare car globally. They were designed and built originally in the UK. It's not really conducive weather-wise for a car that doesn't have doors or a roof. And then they got really popular in Australia and were built locally in Sydney. And they were also really popular in Portugal, of all places, who built them for a long time. So it's one of those other cars that kind of fits that model for us, where there was thousands of them. People have great fondness and great memories of them. They weren't an expensive car back in the day, but that made them, I don't want to say necessarily mainstream, but it meant they were all over the place. And you could... so the memories are there. The vehicles are still there. They're still out in garages. People have them in holiday homes, and hope that they still run every year when they jump in them. So it was a bit of a dream car for us to do, but also a really natural extension that was a variation on a platform that we already had.
Okay, so yeah, I have seen them around. I feel like I haven't seen them in a while, but I definitely have seen them before. Whenabouts were these Mokes particularly popular? What kind of years are we talking about? Are these 70s?
Yeah, so it's really 70s, like late 70s is where they really kicked in. I think there was, and I'm back projecting on automotive history a little bit here, but I reckon like there's post-oil crisis. They were a small engine, so they were very efficient. There was kind of that, Australia kind of came out and was a bit more sort of had a bit more freedom into the 70s, into just culturally, like it was just a very cool thing to do, particularly obviously in Queensland and places like that. They were $4-5 grand, so they weren't super cheap, but they were comparable to other cars. And then they really kicked up a gear in like the late 70s, like 77, I think, onwards. There'll be Mocha historians who know this much better than me. But then Australia started to build its own version, so that it was called it will be badged the Californian. Had nothing to do technically with California, but California's cool. So it was called the Californian, and what that had was bigger wheels, slightly different suspension, really built for Australia. It just had more ground clearance as well, so that so you could drive it on the beach better and off road a bit better. So that late 70s, very early 80s was the kind of moke heyday, and eventually, of course, it succumbs to not being quite the safest car, and taste changing, and there's only so much market for something like that. They built commercial versions. You could buy a ute version of the moke. All these things that a wonderful little moment in automotive history, but maybe not the most practical thing.
Right. Okay. Driving on the beach. Was that a thing back? I think we can. I think I've been to one place where you can do that. So I think that was in South Australia.
Oh yeah. So driving on the beach is still. So in Victoria, there's nowhere you can drive on the beach, but South Australia, lots of beaches. New South Wales, once you get particularly north, so around Newcastle and stuff, there's some amazing beaches to drive on. And then up through Queensland and things, a lot of places, particularly in WA, Northern Queensland, the best way to get somewhere is the beach. And then other places like Magnetic Island and things had mokes available to rent for years and years and years. Yeah.
So you've made this platform ADR compliant, Australian design rules, which means that it's roadworthy and can be registered to use. It's hard to imagine the original moke being ADR compliant by the sounds of it. But how difficult was that to? I mean, were there any particular technical or regulatory challenges in making that platform ADR compliant?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we get asked, that's a big comment on social. How is this legal? Or can I register this in whatever state you're in? All of our vehicles are technically, they're the original vehicle modified. So if that's a 1980 moke, it is still classified in the system as a 1980 moke. So you could have an historic car on the road. You could have a car from 1920 or whatever, and it's original, and it's still, it obviously doesn't have ABS and airbags from 1920, but it's still able to be driven, and so would an original moke. Once you start modifying that car and putting more power into it, whether that's a petrol engine or an electric motor, you then start to trigger a bunch of safety requirements onto that vehicle. So you've increased the power. You need to then prove that the brakes work. So do the brakes stop this car from 60, 80, 100 kilometers an hour? So there is a whole brake certification program that you go through. So for us in the Moke's case, that is, we upgrade the brakes, we do different braking systems, a whole new brake system, make the brake boosted brakes so the brakes feel better. With steering, that's about having a collapsible section in the steering. The original steering architecture of the Moke and the Minis of the time. It passed requirements, but it gets really murky, and I'd want to avoid going into the thousands of pages of Australian design regulations that got, as you'd expect, get more stringent and force safer cars over the years. So we have to go beyond prove that we're as safe as they were when they were built, but also go beyond that in a number of ways. So like I mentioned before, one of those reasons is for regulatory reasons. We have to pass these things. The other is just, what would we want to build? What can we in good conscience put out on the road? And it's not about finding loopholes to get through. It is about making a better car. And there's a big difference between if you're building a car for yourself and it can be frustrating having to make because an argument would be like, how safe is a moke going to be in a very serious crash anyway? And that is a real consideration, of course, and I'm sure is a reason that many people choose not to buy a car from us. How safe can a 1958 Land Rover really be, no matter how much work we put into it? It cannot be as safe as a brand new car. However, we can make sure that the brakes are, up to current standards. In the Land Rovers, we do side intrusion, side impact protection. We do structural rails on the outside of the vehicle that meet current requirements for side impact protection. Electric power steering helps that handling. The fact that you've got electric motor means you're never going to stall the car. You're never going to be in the middle of an intersection and stall. So we can change the center of gravity and make that work better. But we can't, of course, do things like install airbags and that kind of thing. So ADR compliance is a big thing for us in all of the things that we add. We have to make the car safer because we've increased the power, but we also need to do things like install inertia reel seat belts. So when you think of a seat belt, you think of grabbing over your shoulder and pulling it down across you. An early Moke would have had no seat belts. Then they would have just had lap belts. Eventually, they got inertia reel belts later in the early 80s. But then what was the structure that held that seat belt? They weren't doing computer simulations of that stuff. So we do CAD designed, tested, simulated structures that support a seat belt that is going to keep you in position in an accident. And it's thousands of little things across the vehicle that we've done to, again, we're not building a brand new car, but we're trying to make the existing car as safe as we possibly can.
So it's not what triggers the ADR compliance. Is it the type of change that you're making, or is it the fact that you're making any changes at all? So for example, if you wanted to replace a staircase in your house, you would have to, or even sort of do significant changes to it. You would have to go with, even if that staircase that existed wasn't compliant with the latest sort of rules. If you want to make any changes or replace it, you would have to be compliant with the latest rules. So is it dependent on the type of change that you're making to the vehicle, or is it just the fact that you're making any changes that triggers the updated compliance?
Oh, it's a little bit of both. It's weird. If you were to just keep restoring it and continuing to put the original parts in, or a variation of parts that had, if you had a model and it was like, it also had this optional engine at the time, and you put that optional engine in today, they're probably okay. There's different rules for every category of car part in a way. If you touch them, if you modify brakes at all, even going from drums to discs, of course the discs are better brakes, but you've got to get those tested and you've got to prove that they are capable and everything. So I think that home renovation analogy is a pretty good one, because you can imagine, yes, you're replacing the staircase in your house. Now you could go and get that engineered, you could get a licensed builder, it goes through and you've got planning permission and all of that, or you just went and did it. And who's to know? And that's a lot of cars being modified in Australia, is people just going and doing stuff in their garage and driving it around. And it doesn't mean that it's unsafe. It just means that maybe it's not. Sometimes it doesn't mean it's unsafe, but it means that maybe if you were in an accident, well, the insurance company looks at that and goes, well, you've modified this and where's the record that that's got engineering approval? Obviously for us, we're selling cars to customers and building cars for other people. We can't be doing that. We need to be building a safe and compliant system where our licensed, registered engineers are on the hook for that. I'm on the hook for that as a director of the company. So it is about, if we were just restoring cars to their original state, no, we would not have to change anything. But we are, of course, fundamentally changing these cars by putting an electric motor in the first place. So let's build what these cars should be and can be and make them as safe as we possibly can, again, without fundamentally changing the character of that car.
So for this particular platform, for the Moke, can you give us some performance specs around, like, what's the range, what's the power, like,
performance and specs on that Moke. I guess, like I mentioned with the Mini, that handling was the key, lightness was the key. That transfers directly to the Moke as well. You're not planning, although some people definitely have driven across Australia in them, that is not the use case for most people with the Moke. So it's short trips. So let's keep that same Mini platform. What that means is a 19 kilowatt hour battery. And that's not you didn't mishear me, not 90, 19. It's probably the smallest EV battery on the market, unless you're talking hybrids. But that keeps the weight low, which keeps that 19 kilowatt hours can do a fair bit. So that's about 160 kilometers of range in the Moke. It's more in the Mini because the Mini is more aerodynamic. But 160 kilometers of range, you can imagine a 19 kilowatt hour battery pack, even on a 6 kilowatt single phase AC charger, you're 0 to 100 in 3 hours. And so your usual, charging time is probably, hour and a half kind of thing. That and a 72 kilowatt motor in the front, driving the front wheels, so same configuration as originally, that will get the Moke to 100 in about 8 seconds. We do have a drive mode, so we have kind of normal mode and sport mode, and that normal mode is, I guess, a reduced power, a nicer feeling, softer throttle. It's a big part of what we do is designing and engineering the feel and the performance of the pedal so that it's really nice to drive as a normal driver. It's really easy to throw an electric motor in a car by default, hit the throttle and just give me everything. That's kind of fun for a moment, but it's a terrible car to drive. So sport mode unleashes a bit more, but still a controlled power. We've got as standard, we have a 6 kilowatt single phase AC charger. Like I said, small battery pack means that's probably home charging, public AC charging is pretty fine. We can do DC charging as an option. That charger is bi-directional, so you've got vehicle to load out of the Moke, which is cool.
No, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. And look, not much else. Little radiator. We do a full new 12-volt system, so that's with a PDM, so power distribution rather than fuses and relays. The last thing we want is for the car to be, have an issue because we've left the 1980s wiring in there. So all new wiring, gauges, controls, all of that kind of stuff. New seat belt mounting points, new seat mounting points, new dash. And almost always new LED lighting on every vehicle we build as well.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I assume you've built a couple of these already.
Yeah.
So what do people say about the driving experience? Like, what's their sort of feedback generally in terms of what's gained?
I think it was interesting when we first built the first Mini, because it does drive so similar, and we built that for BMW Australia, so who owns the current Mini brand. And then we had the Mini Club in, and we had a bunch of people who most car enthusiasts have driven a Mini, and they know what, it was the handling that made it great, and you kind of changed gears really well to keep it in the power band, and it was fun. That reaction was just smiles immediately. And I think, I'm speaking to it, if you're listening to this podcast, EVs, right? That experience of instant throttle response is more noticeable, I think, and more remarkable in an old car because you just don't expect it. You get into a modern car, say you're getting into a Tesla, but if you got into a back-to-back between a BMW, a brand new BMW, and it was the petrol one or it was the electric one, they're both quiet, they're both powerful, they both have pretty good throttle response. The EV feels different, yes, but new cars are just quiet and powerful. That's just what they are. But you get into a classic car like a Mini and you touch the throttle and it immediately responds. It feels pretty magic. And I think that's the same and then you take that to the Moke, you've got that incredible handling, you've got that incredible responsiveness, but you can also have a conversation at 60 k's an hour because there's not an engine noise coming around there's just a windscreen there and nothing else. So I think with the classic Land Rovers, particularly when we're doing canvas tops or no top, or the Moke, it's the quietness is such a huge thing. You can still hear the electric motor and the tire noise and the wind noise, but you can have a conversation, and that's kind of remarkable. And I think the other big one is that they become cars that are genuinely livable as your everyday driving car. And we have customers who come in with that intention. We have customers who that's almost an accidental benefit. They've come in thinking they're buying a kind of weekend car and end up using it every day. But other customers who've gone from a little hatchback, a Honda hatchback, and replaced it with a Jaunt because you can drive it every day. It's fully automatic. It's responsive. It steers well. It handles well. It's got a bit more character, and it makes you smile every day.
Hmm. So you're saying people coming from a Honda hatchback and going to a Jaunt platform, right? So you this might be a silly question, but so you can provide the model itself. It's if someone comes to you and says, I like to I want to do it, like I want to use your Moke platform. Do you have to come to you with a Moke initially, or do
No,
you also
it's a good question. I probably should have said earlier that most of our customers don't have a car to start with. And a big thing that we came into this thinking was, if we go in and start selling this really bespoke niche automotive service conversion of your old car, that reaches a certain audience, which is quite different to saying the greatest cars in history, electric, come and buy one. We're selling cars, not mechanical services, even though technically that's, of course, what we're doing. So most of our customers don't have a car when they come to us. They come to us and say, hey, I'd love a Jaunt Land Rover or a Jaunt Moke. And my first question is, hey, do you have a car or do you need us to source one? Some people might be like, oh yeah, I've got, my family's got a car or whatever. But the majority, we go and find a great donor car, which is, of course, a car that is a really straight body and is in really good condition, but has ideally a blown up engine or something that makes it cheap to buy. And then we can do the work and paint it the exact color that the customer wants. And from their perspective, they walk away with a new, in quotation marks, a new car.
That's interesting. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to have a classic car in order to use the Jaunt Motors service. Okay, so part of the service is you sourcing that car. How difficult is that? Is that always easy, or is that sometimes quite time consuming and difficult?
The simple answer is yeah, it is actually easy, and it is probably easier than the sourcing and procurement of a lot of the EV parts that we use that are quite specialist and come from overseas. The cars that we work with, if you think Land Rovers, Minis, Combis, these are cars that there are thousands and thousands of them in Australia, and maybe you don't see them as much on the road anymore. 20 years ago you did, but as they get older, they get driven less. But they don't get thrown away; they get put in storage. And so, Land Rovers, for example, we work with a place near Goulburn called Land Rover Heaven, and they have hundreds of Land Rovers in a field. And we can either give them a brief. Sometimes customers will go and visit them and choose a Land Rover, and part of the fun of that might be choosing one with, you want a certain body shape. That's cool. Here's a few hundred of those. Oh, let's find the one with the history that resonates with you. Oh, this one built this part of the Snowy Hydro, or this one was from a farm here. So you can have that bit of history and story from the car, or maybe that doesn't matter at all, and you're just after a body shell, and let's get it done as effectively as possible. So the sourcing of vehicles is actually pretty straightforward.
I find it interesting that you're saying majority of your customers are people who don't already own a classic car, because I would have thought that people who are investing in this conversion process, they're car enthusiasts. They've probably got a couple of Land Rovers in their old Land Rovers or a Moke in their garage. They want to keep using it, but they're finding that the maintenance is extremely difficult, and one of the key selling points for conversion, I would imagine, would be just how much easier it is to maintain these vehicles going forward. So I guess I would imagine that's part of your customer base. But actually, what you're saying, the majority would be people who don't. I mean, they must be into classic cars, right? For them to
well. So that's the interesting thing. Your point spot on. The big appeal is the no maintenance. You don't have to keep fixing an engine. But then the big part of that market is the people who don't know and don't care to know and don't want to ever know how to fix an engine. Suddenly, they wouldn't define themselves as classic car enthusiasts because they've probably never owned one. Most of our customers have never owned a classic car because of all that maintenance trouble you just mentioned. That is a barrier. I've had friends who've owned classic cars of their dreams, and after 2 years they get rid of them because it's so annoying. And I'd be the same. There's heaps of cool cars that I'm like, yeah, but I'm not going to own one because I don't want to spend every weekend tinkering with it. Like, it's kind of fun, but I want to be using it. So most of our customers, many may have an electric car, but most don't have a classic car. And this is their first, because suddenly they can have the classic car without dealing with all that, internal, 1950s internal combustion technology. Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, so wow. Okay, yeah. It didn't occur to me that
Because
would be.
what's your dream car? You got a dream classic car?
um, do I have a dream classic car? I really liked. I think it was one of the royals that drove it. Maybe it was Prince Harry's wedding. He had a Jaguar, which was converted to electric, and I thought that was pretty cool. Like I would have one of those.
So very cool, right? And so, but you should never own a classic E, like an original E-Type. Like they are, well, they're expensive, right? There's that, but they're of course beautiful, but they're also one of the most unreliable cars ever made. So there's a reason you don't see people driving around their E-Types, is because they don't drive. They just don't work very well. And so, not that that's the only barrier to stopping you from owning a classic E-Type, but yeah, an electric version is like, oh, so I could just drive this every day, or as many days as I wanted to. That's the big difference.
Yeah. Okay. And so, as a result, can you see this becoming a bit more than just like a really niche sort of classic enthusiast market? I suppose that's kind of what you're.
And I guess it's probably the better description. I mean, it's not really. It is obviously people are enthused enough to do this, but the challenge is the price. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of parts, but it is a lot of labor, a huge amount of labor to obviously disassemble the original vehicle, clean, restore, repair, upgrade all the other components. There's tens and there's probably 100 there is more than $100,000 of parts that goes into one of our Land Rover conversions. It's not just labor and it's not, because all new axles, new brakes, new steering, new suspension, new, like, so much stuff on top of the EV things. Now every car's not like that, but it is expensive. And so I would love to personally afford one of the cars we make, but the challenge is you're competing against the you're competing against the money people actually have to spend on something like this or on any car, but you're competing against a price expectation of new cars that are built at a volume of hundreds of thousands by robots in a factory with razor thin margins, and sometimes not even any profit margin because it's subsidized by the country that's, whether it's Germany or Japan or China or wherever. Human labor in Australia on very low volume cannot compete with that. And so the cost is prohibitive unless we were to jump to a huge level of scale. And I think that is the challenge for conversions ever being more than a niche thing, is that even if we were to say get to a point where you've got you bought a brand new petrol Golf, Volkswagen Golf last year, great car, and in 5 years you're like, wouldn't this be cool if this could convert to electric? So, okay, there'll be a new Volkswagen ID4 or whatever they're calling it then, and it's probably going to be 50 grand or something like that. So we would have to compete from a conversion perspective with that price at least. So, but say we were 50 grand, say we were price parity. Well, why would you go and get a conversion when you could get a brand new car that was not just electric, but it smelled fresher, it was in the newer, cooler color, it had the bigger CarPlay screen, it had the national brand campaign, it was on billboards and you were seeing it every day telling you that this car's way better than the old one. So then you ask the question, well, how cheap would a conversion need to be to consider it against the new car? Well, significantly cheaper as well, because that's the one's got a brand new warranty and it's probably 7 years or something like that. So where are we at? $30,000? That's still a lot of money to put into your old car. So it's a tricky thing to think, unless there's a I guess, a big step change, and there's government support, or there's something, and it's beyond my scope as a business guy to figure out what that would look like. It is huge scale, some semi-automation, large production line, and subsidies to make conversion at scale work. So without that, it remains a niche that is cars that already have value, intrinsic value and financial value, where you may be over capitalizing, so to speak, but that car is often an appreciating asset in a strange way that classic cars can be. So we are within the realm of, if you want to do a V8 engine swap into a car, which people do all the time, thousands of them happening right now across Australia, that's still a $70,000 exercise. Obviously, there's people doing it in their backyard and buying or in their own workshop and whatever, and where labour is free, then theoretically technically the cost might be lower, but people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on customized cars. We are in that market, and by standardizing as much as we can on the platform, we can continue to bring that price down, and we can continue to, I think, as importantly, improve the reliability, because that is a big selling point: the simplicity, the reliability, as well as the performance and all of that sort of stuff.
Would you any plans to export vehicles to other markets?
Yeah, we've got a vehicle in here from New Zealand right now, that customers shipped over and will ship back. We've exported a few mini systems to New Zealand, and we have. We're always keen and open to working with other workshops wherever they are in Australia or around the world, because we can help those workshops probably build maybe their first EV conversion. So a lot of classic car companies, restorers, get asked about EV. It is a huge leap or sidestep, let's say, in technology, but a very different understanding. So we can provide instructions, we can provide everything in the crate, we can train you, we can do all these things. We would love to be providing more and more workshops. And again, more scale equals, more economies of that scale that come from that. So yeah, very, very keen. If you're a workshop listening to this, love to help you offer Mini, Moke, Land Rovers, Combis, whatever it is, electric ones to your customers. Come and visit, have a drive. We can chat through how relatively straightforward it can be, because we can provide everything that you need.
And have you found that we obviously at the Driven we keep a keen eye on the uptake of EVs generally in Australia, and we are seeing a gradual increase in that. And I think we're getting to a point now where people are really actively considering it as their next vehicle, if they haven't owned one before. Have you found that that's also had an effect on the demand for services from Jaunt Motors? Are you seeing like an uptake from EVs as it becomes a little bit more familiar and ubiquitous in Australia?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously, we are offering what is still an expensive niche product. So there's like all of automotive in a lot of areas, coming out of COVID, that was peak demand, right? But we weren't ready. We didn't have a bunch of platforms in production at that point. We have consistent demand. I think that we are naturally attracting early adopters anyway. We're not building it's not mainstream vehicles that we're building. So you have to have some sort of passion and desire. I definitely see that it is getting more and more mainstream, in the sense that it's not people who are looking for. A lot of our customers have been, quite early adopters, and you really got that sense that they were open to it being almost being along for the journey, and they're okay with us going, okay, well, it's, we'll get you a software update next week that'll enable this feature and whatever. The expectation is that we've, and we have, and we go out to market saying this, is that we've built a platform and you can come in and drive this away, and you don't have to ever talk to us again if you don't want to. So it's, and that idea of, I'm going to buy a Jaunt or any EV, and it is going to replace my current car and may be my first EV. So a lot of the work that we do sort of, I guess, after sales or after delivery is helping people navigate installing their first home charger in their garage.
Yeah, right. Cool. Any what's the plans next? Have you got any particular vehicles that you guys dream of electrifying next?
So I haven't talked about it, but we work on a few commercial projects as well. So there's a few pretty cool larger vehicles that we're working on with some other Australian companies that we'll be talking more about soon, later in the year. We are working, if you follow our socials, often in stories and things like this, we're working on a combi platform that'll be coming out soon, Porsche 911, some other cool, few little bespoke ones. I guess the big thing we're really going to be talking about soon is our new Land Rover platform. So we've built quite a few Land Rovers on our old generation platform. We basically spent 2 years redesigning everything, and still looks like an old Land Rover on the outside, but is fundamentally a full revision of that platform, and just is a, I don't know, drives very, I don't know how to quite describe it, but it is a genuinely transformative thing. It's still a great fun old Land Rover, but it just drives amazingly.
Exciting. Cool. Well, thanks so much, Dave, for coming on to the Driven podcast. And it's really, really interesting stuff you guys are doing at Jaunt Motors, and hopefully we'll have you guys back on again in the future. But thanks for joining.
No worries. Thanks so much.
You are back with the Driven podcast. We've still got Tim Eden here with us, and Riz had to duck off. He wasn't feeling 100%, but we did manage to line up a quick substitution in the form of the editor of the Driven, Giles Parkinson. Giles, how does it feel to be welcomed on to this podcast?
Always very happy to be a bench player, Sam. If I'm just coming off the last couple of minutes of the game, that's it's entirely fine. I'm getting old, so I probably couldn't last the full 90 minutes anyway.
Yeah, it's just you're a marquee signing, but best to manage your minutes so you can have full impact in less time. You guys wouldn't have listened to that Jaunt Motors interview just yet because I only just recorded it earlier today at the time of this recording. But it was a pretty interesting interview. I thought it was actually really interesting, just talking about electric conversions and where that sits in the mix of the uptakes of EVs generally. There's a few things about Jaunt Motors that I wasn't aware of prior to the interview, but I thought was really interesting. They've just released a platform specific for Moke, those mini Mokes, which were apparently quite the big deal, at least for a short period of time.
In my age, when I was a young player and able to play the full 90 minutes, mini Mokes were all the go. Yes.
And I was saying they kind of look like bathtubs with wheels. It doesn't look like something you want to have a head-on collision with, but they certainly have their.
Well, you might want to have a head-on collision with it, but you wouldn't want to be in it when you had one, I suppose.
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it'd be fine if you're on the other side, in the other vehicle.
I think the attraction of them is there's just this sort of simple structure. It's a bit like the Land Rovers, which I think Jaunt initially targeted. It's a simple structure, and in theory, it's relatively easy to convert. But I think it's still a very niche thing, and people need to love their Land Rovers and love their Mokes to want to pay the money it needs to make them electric. But what a wonderful thing if they are.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not. It's not a cheap process, but it's not a simple process either. I mean, just going through some, the length of things that they need to consider in order to make sure that the vehicle doesn't just have a new battery motor in it, but it also, has it's kind of maintained a lot of the original characteristics of what made that particular vehicle good in the first place. And at the same time, you've got to make sure that it's roadworthy, and so that's no small feat either. So,
I mean, if Australia had decent sort of vehicle emission standards and sort of regulations, I mean, we'd actually have to force them to go electric. There's one notorious Land Rover that runs around Byron Bay, and it's so polluting. I was parked behind it trying to sort of get my surfboard on the roof, and I said, mate, Yeah, that exhaust is absolutely disgusting. It's almost impossible to breathe. And the guy looked at me and said, "Well, you look like you're breathing okay." Just sort of turned around and walked off. I forgot to say that maybe he should put his kids behind it and see how they go. I mean, that would be child abuse. But I mean, some of those old machines, they are disgusting and
I
polluting.
thought there were some rules around that. I'm sure there's a number or an email from the Department of or the EPA, which you can report. I think I've done that once before. I saw that.
I looked at that too, and you've got to actually sort of take an image of them, a camera image for 10 seconds, and have smoke blowing out of it. But
You got to have video
footage. It's not actually visible. If you're driving on the road, then you shouldn't be picking up your camera and filming other people. And if you're static, then they tend to drive away. You've got to run down the street after them. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
You could have used your dash cam on the Tesla, Giles.
Well, I was halfway in my wet seat at the time. So anyway.
Well, one thing I didn't realize about it is that you don't necessarily, because I thought, okay, this is quite a niche market still, but you needn't necessarily own the vehicle before converting it. I mean, Jaunt will, if you feel like you want to have a mini Moke, you don't have to have a Moke. They'll source that for you, and then they'll do the conversion. So I thought that was interesting. I mean, still, obviously, there is, the cost of doing that is. You have to really like the Merc or the classic car that you want to convert, because it is quite an investment, because it's not a very small process, but yeah, I thought it was it'd be, I guess, interesting to see how popular and how mainstream that can become with the obvious restraints that it has. Because if you've got as Dave said in the interview, if you've got a car like a Volkswagen Golf and you want to replace it, the cost of replacing it is going to be, quite outweighed by the cost of converting it to electric. And on top of that, you're getting a brand new vehicle. So I think it really relies on I guess the sentimental and nostalgic value that the customer places on a particular vehicle. But having said that, if I had the money to get an electric Land Rover, I certainly would consider it. That's for sure. So, Giles, you went to this MG event this week, which was they were launching a couple of new models. Was that right, in Sydney?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting actually, because MG it only took me an hour to get there from Piedmont all the way over to the other side of Piedmont.
Well, that's how we know it's in Sydney. Yeah.
So MG have done pretty well at the lower end of the market, lower price end of the market, with the ZS EV and the MG4, and now they've decided to tackle the what they call the premium luxury market. So they've released what they call, so they've got this new brand called IM. It's Intelligence in Motion, or Intelligent Mobility, depending on who you listen to. And they've got a sedan, the IM5, and an SUV, the IM6. They kind of look pretty similar to the Model 3 and the Model Y, which is interesting, as far as I could tell, because they rolled out the cars at this sort of very elaborate presentation, and immediately it was set upon by influencers and models all over it, and the bonnet and the boot and the car and the seats. So it was pretty hard to get a good look at them. But they're pretty impressive cars, I think. It will probably just appeal to a certain market. The performance is going to be really interesting. 0 to 100 in 3.2 seconds. Big batteries, big range, strong performance, four-wheeled steering, so really impressive handling, amazing turning circles. They are big cars. They're almost 5 meters long. They're almost 2 meters wide. But amazingly, they don't actually have much space inside. They've just got these thickest doors you've ever seen. And even in the boot, there's not much space, because the fact they've got the four-wheel steering, they've got the sort of steering mechanisms in the rear. I guess that's what's taking the space. So it's not the sort of roomy thing that you expect to see in sort of really large EVs, but it's got all those sort of luxurious appointments that the Chinese market really like. And it's going to be really interesting to see what sort of traction they get in the market. And it seems to be directly pitched at the part of the market that has been dominated by the Model 3 and the Model Y, and they've been able to comfortably beat anything that BMW or Audi can throw at them. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here. But it's now a competitive market. You've got the Xpeng, they've got the Geely, which are kind of aimed slightly lower. These are a bit more luxurious, a bit more well fitted, a bit more performance. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, starting at 60, I think 69.90 for the
Yeah, drive away. Yeah.
model to drive away, and then going up to probably a bit over 80, I think, is, if I remember correctly, for the performance versions. So yeah, that does put it right in the competition of Tesla's vehicles. Yeah, do you have any first impressions, Tim, on this IM5 and stuff?
Well, I actually saw one parked on the street. I think it was when I dropped off the or went to pick up the Geely EX5 Monday previous week. It was parked near MSR where I pick up cars from, so it's potentially an early press car or something. So I couldn't have a look inside, but I did take a couple of photos with it parked on the street, and it looks quite good to me. It looked quite stylish from the outside. As Giles said, they're quite big cars and quite low to the ground. I only saw the IM5, so.
It's
Yeah,
interesting with MG, because this is purely just my personal perspective, but I see MG as a brand that had a lot of sort of heritage, and it was associated a lot with that kind of higher end of the market, and then it was bought by the Chinese, and then it's been producing lower end vehicles since. Not to say that they're necessarily bad, but the reputation certainly shifted, and what they were producing was very different to what they were producing historically. And so I'm wondering if this represents an attempt to shift back to that sort of higher end of the market, or whether it's just something they wanted to do to add to their collection of existing vehicles. We've had a couple of EV models from MG already, and this is just one which is priced a bit above those ones and has a bit more luxury. Is this in your view, Giles, is this a tack in strategy from MG, or is it just another vehicle on their fleet?
Look, it's definitely a change in strategy, I think. They want to be sort of seen as a bit of a high end, have that sort of full sort of range. But we're seeing that with BYD as well. So BYD came out with these low cost EVs, and now they've just sort of ramped them up to with the launch of their premium models. So I think they want sort of full scope and full range, and they don't really distinguish themselves in the same way as some of the European car manufacturers or some of the other manufacturers who tend to sort of do. They're considered sort of low price or high price, premium vehicles. They're trying to sort of cover the whole gamut. Although I guess if you think about the Renaults and the Peugeots of the world, you can go from sort of low price to sort of premium vehicles, and maybe that's what they're trying to emulate.
I mean, I guess it's interesting to me, and I could be wrong, but to me, it's interesting that a lot of these EV brands are attempting to cover that whole range of prices, because I mean, I feel like traditionally, when you have the traditional brands that we're very used to in Australia, at least, like you got Toyota and the Hyundais and the Kias, they've all traditionally they kind of sit in their spot on their lane. That's the entry level brands that offer a lot of value and very accessible for a big part of the car market. And then you've got other brands like Audi and BMW who obviously cater to a different part of the car market. But it feels like with these EV brands, there a lot more of them compared to traditional brands are trying to cover both parts of that market, entry level, but also the luxury level as well. Is that
Well, what they can do, because EVs is relatively simple to make, and they've actually got experience in that lower end of the market, they're quite convinced that they can do those premium models better and more cheaply than the legacy car makers. I guess that's the opportunity that they're seeing.
I guess the interesting thing to see would be, people do buy vehicles like they buy anything, partly due to brand, and so they may be able to create these models which are higher end, but can you do that successfully whilst not necessarily having that luxury reputation? I suppose that to me is interesting. Will people spend 80 or 90 grand on a BYD if they have that kind of car that come out, or would they rather spend it on a brand which feels like is more sort of more fitting of that kind of price range, in terms of just having that brand and reputation? So I don't know. Is that a bit of an odd thought? Am I alone there, or was that a bit of silence from you too? Yeah. Geez, whatever you say, Sam. That's okay. Well, that's my musings. Let's move right along then. Maybe some of our listeners will resonate with what I just said, or maybe not. I just want to go back to Tesla and their robotaxi briefly, because they have expanded their robotaxi service to the Bay Area or California, but not entirely. I wouldn't say it's entirely robotic by the sounds of it. Not entirely autonomous just yet. Tim, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary, Sam. So they, up until now, they've been operating just in Austin, Texas. They've still had human safety drivers, and in the rules in Texas are a little bit more flexible. So those safety monitoring drivers, I think they call it, are allowed to actually go from the driver's seat and sit in the front passenger seat of those cars. They are still, they still have access to like some sort of kill switch where they can just, instantly stop the car or stop it very quickly if they need to. The interesting thing in the launch of the Bay Area is, people who are using it still have to book through the Robotaxi Tesla app, but they've actually changed the wording slightly. So they're calling it a ride-hailing service, and essentially, basically, the safety driver is sitting in the front driver's seat, just like any other regular driver. So it's essentially just the same as any other Tesla with the full self-driving FSD package. They've just got a driver sitting there who's using the FSD package and giving you a lift around. So, Tesla fans obviously saying it's a big momentous occasion. They're expanding into different cities, but it's really nothing new because Teslas with FSD driving around have been out for a long time, all over the North America. So,
so what exactly does this expansion mean then? If it's not particularly what does it mean that robotaxis expanded to California if it's just using the same FSD package that's already being used?
It's a good question. I mean, it obviously depends who you ask. If you ask the Tesla fans, you get one thing. Like I said, there, it's a glorious moment. But if you read some of the more cynical points of view, it's essentially just Tesla playing games, trying to make themselves look good compared to Waymo, for example.
I'm just wondering if I was as a customer, would I prefer to have if I ordered an Uber or robotaxi, would I rather have no driver sitting there and the car driving itself, or would I rather have the owner of the car sitting there, not driving, but just sitting there in the car with me? I feel like maybe the former. I mean, it seems like an odd dynamic to get in someone's car and they're just kind of sitting there, and the vehicle's driving itself. It's kind of they're essentially a passenger almost. I don't know. I wonder how the conversations flow, or if the dynamic is any different when you're in a car where there is technically a driver, but he's really just there to welcome you in and and to press the button to go.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I guess we'll see how things go, but I think, I mean, there's some interesting stuff happening underneath. So, some people are saying that, or Tesla actually came out and said, "Oh, we're just waiting for the proper sort of autonomous driving permits to be able to operate in California." But then some people are reporting that they've actually asked the state government stuff in California, and Tesla hasn't even applied for that yet. So I think there's some weird stuff going on there where they're potentially making it look like they're better than they are, or the software is more advanced than it is, kind of thing. So I think it's a sort of a long saga that's still playing out, I would say.
Very strange stuff. So, Giles, any views on that?
Well, I mean, Tesla's basically staking its future now on the success of this autonomous driving. It's clearly not selling cars as well as it used to be able to. It made a loss on its car sales in the last half, if you don't include the sort of the credits and the rebates. So that's not the future of the company. And I think sort of analysts and the price reflects the fact that, it's autonomy. That's the future of the company. Is just whether you believe Elon Musk or not. Tesla fans swear by him and believes everything they can do, he does, is wonderful and will be delivered. And I think the level of skepticism around his comments has increased quite significantly. Probably mostly because of his political statements over the last 6 months. I think that's done. He's lost a lot of his audience because of that, and so I think people are sort of looking. There was a bigger fan base, and people sort of go, Tesla, fantastic. And I never quite bought into autonomy. I never got FSD on either of the two Teslas that my family owned, because owned, because I just don't ever think it's going to be in Australia in the lifetime of these cars. So I just thought it was a bit of a waste of money. But there's a lot of people who swear by it. A lot of people get very excited about it. It just doesn't want to have an accident anytime soon with them, because the insurers might think it's value for money, because I think there's no doubt that robots can probably drive a car more safely than a human. But when they make a mistake, humans are going to be less forgiving about what happens and why. So that's the big conundrum about this whole thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think Elon Musk is hoping and expecting that he gets a favorable view now from the regulators in the new administration. Let's just see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I keep saying it's interesting. It is interesting, though.
It's a $1 trillion bet basically in his company. I mean, if you think about his company, it's that's
well, yeah, and it's not the first time that he's made claims or said things which could be analysed and seen as a bit dubious. But I think that there is that difference, being that there's been some reputational damage from his entry into the political space, and so I guess the question then is, can he still get away with some of these these kind of claims and sort of dubious comments that he might make every now and then about what he's doing and what Tesla's doing? Does it still have the same weight? Can he still generate that buzz that he was so good at doing before with Tesla, and often delivering on them eventually? But
yeah, I mean, give the guy credit. I mean, the Tesla have changed the world, the face of the world's grids with its batteries, both sort of household batteries and grid batteries. And their cars have been amazing, really. I mean, they have changed the whole sort of equation around EVs. I just think that sort of the community and regulators are still trying to get their mind around autonomy in all its iterations, and AI and stuff like that. And people are just really struggling with this about what it means and the things. So yeah, and look, he's always sort of gilded the lily a bit and sort of promised things that were in timeframes which were sort of unachievable, but he's delivered good stuff anyway. But I think people are just struggling to get their minds around it.
One thing about the robots driving the cars that pops up in my mind is that even if robots, and I think we could safely say that robots statistically would be safer at driving and better at driving technically better vehicles, but we're not used to people driving technically excellent in terms of doing. People drive like humans do. And there's a certain behavior and pattern of behavior that you would associate with humans driving it. And so when a robot drives it, and I think Riz touched on this before when he was saying there was some issues with I can't remember which car it was, but just the way that it goes around corners and it slows down a lot more than what you would expect a normal person to do. It may be technically safer, but there's a lot of adjustment, I would imagine, that would need to be made for people who are driving next to and alongside these robotically driven vehicles, because they're just different patterns of behaviors. So I think that would be something which would also need to be require a little bit of getting used to, I suppose. So, I mean, to give a completely unrelated example, it would be if you're playing someone in a video game, like you're playing, FIFA, you're playing a human, and then you play the computer. The team you're playing is completely different. It's a bit more predictable in some ways, but it's you can kind of predict the behavior a little bit more. And I think that in a strange way, to me, that might apply a bit to predicting how other people are driving, and people just being used to people driving and not robots. Anyway, that's the end of my rant about robotic driving. Not against it or for it. I think it's a space we'll have to keep a keen eye on. Although for now, I mean, I do still enjoy driving myself, so I'll keep doing that until I'm told not to. Just finally, Giles, with just want to touch on Essential Energy. They were rolling out some V2G capability. What can you say about that?
Yeah, well, this is pretty interesting actually, because sort of vehicle, and all the networks. So we've been given license to go ahead with V2G. So basically now we're waiting for the providers of the technology We're waiting for standards. Well, we've got the standards now. We're now waiting for the technology to come in. Waiting for the network approvals, and then we're waiting for the cars to sort of say, yes, okay, it works with me. And what I found really interesting was Essential Energy talking about some of its grid engineers. They've got their own electric vehicles. One has a Geely G5, X5, sorry, and he's plugged it in, charging up his battery, which then can charge up the house and do the vehicle to grid thing and export back to the grid. So they're talking about vehicle to home, vehicle to grid, and vehicle to X, which means sort of charging a whole bunch of other things. So, and they're saying it's all kind of go from there. So I just thought that was an interesting development. I've actually got to find out a bit more about it before rabbiting on too much about it. But the fact that you've now got Essential Energy engineers, and Essential cover the whole regional network in New South Wales. And what they're basically saying is that we're ready to go on this. We're satisfied from a network point of view. We've got a car that does it. We've got a technology, the cable that does it. Let's go. So I just think that's a major development. And one that I think that a lot of people are really interested in, because I think vehicle to grid, just like you've seen this rush for home batteries under the federal government rebate, people are also really interested in using their cars as a bigger home battery. And just linking in between, because if you don't want to charge from the grid because it's power's too expensive, then you can top up from your car.
Out of interest, Giles, which V2G charger or battery or whatever were they using?
So it was SIG Energy, who were one of the new players in the market, already taken it's hard to believe sales figures, but I mean, like a really significant share of the market already. So they're sort of an offshoot from Huawei, and one of those really tech-savvy guys who was frustrated with the progress there, went off and set up his own company. I've seen it. I haven't used it. I've seen it. It looks really good. The reports from the installers are that it is really good. And it's just one of those pretty, sort of smart technologies that is sort of modular, can do a whole bunch of different things. And so they seem to have a bit of a step ahead of the market, and that's an exciting thing, because I think that's going to be the ultimate power for consumers. They're getting screwed by the traditional retailers and their home tariffs and things like that. So there's just this massive push now to sort of get a household battery, get your EV connected, take power in your own hands, and then you can start dictating terms to the retailers rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I think the SIG Energy product is very interesting. I saw it as well at the Smart Energy Council, Smart Energy Conference earlier this year. But and Sarah mentioned it on the podcast last time, Sam, about she had the SIG Energy battery and went from I think a 24 kilowatt hour battery to a 48 kilowatt hour battery, just because it made so much financial sense.
Yeah, and she doesn't even have an EV. I think the timing sort of isn't a coincidence with that 30% rebate out.
Could there be bicycle to grid?
Bicycle to grid.
Not sure if there's a big enough battery, but it's interesting. But
maybe that's an idea. Maybe we can have the driven B2G product. I don't know if we've got the capacity for that. We might stick to podcasts and news articles for now. But we do know that V2G is a hot topic at the moment. A lot of people reading a lot of the stories on the driven related to V2G. So clearly there is a lot of interest in that space. I think that's all we're going to have time for. I think we've kept you guys long enough for the day. But thank you very much, Tim, for joining. And thanks very much, Giles, for popping back into your old office, even just briefly. And I think you've still got it. So we might have to have you back on again soon.
I'll be a bench player for as long as you need me, Sam.
All right. Well, thanks very much to Zika, the sponsor of the Driven Podcast, for your support. Thanks very much to you guys for listening. Be sure to check out the Driven for the latest news and reviews. I think we're going to have the July sales data out in the very near future, so keep an eye out for that. And until next time, take care. Bye for now.